Francis Ford Coppola, the man behind The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, and The Conversation. He's left interviews, notebooks, and personal accounts to help us reconstruct how he thought, prepared, and how he wrote. Today we're going to talk about his writing method, the tools he used, and how he got into other projects. By the end of this, you'll have a better idea of how one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived did their work. This is Modern Note, where we learn from the best makers and builders on how they think and do their work. We look at the process that makes them successful so we can apply these lessons to our own work. All right, let's get into it. Francis Ford Coppola was born in 1939 in Detroit. His dad played the flute for Arturo Toscanini, one of the most influential musicians of the 19th and 20th centuries, and the NBC Symphony Orchestra. Toscanini was a conductor. His mother was an actress. Francis' mother was an actress, so the family moved constantly. He admits that he was a pretty bad student. He failed algebra twice. He was always the new kid in school, and he always fell behind. His dad threatened to send him to Jesuit school if he didn't improve his grades. Coppola later said that he wished that it did happen because he would have learned Latin and Greek. When he was 9, he spent a year bedridden with polio, and to keep himself busy, he got into puppets and puppetry. He used his dad's 8mm camera to make short films. So this is kind of the birth of his filmmaking career, if you will. Fast forward a bit in his life, and he studied theater at Hofstra University. Then he got into UCLA's film program. He got his professional start by working with Roger Corman. Corman was known to give new up-and-comers a start. Before Coppola became a director, he wanted to be a writer. His older brother August wrote fiction. Francis, who is 5 years younger, looked up to him. He wrote stories trying to do exactly what his brother was doing. So writing became Francis's foundation. We're going to fast forward a bit here in his career. So by 1970, Coppola made a few films. Some had done okay, others have failed. At the same time, he had a production company called American Zoetrope, and he was in debt, so he needed to do something pretty quickly. It was around this time that Paramount approached him, and they wanted him to direct The Godfather. He wasn't excited about it. The novel was a bestseller about the Italian mob, but Francis thought it was totally beneath him. He wanted to make art films, so he turned it down. And he turned it down again. More than once, he said, I don't want to do it. In the end, he agreed to take on it because he needed the money. And because his friend, filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich, told him, if you don't do it, someone else will, and you'll spend the rest of your life watching what they did with it. So he committed to doing the movie. And when he committed, he decided to go all in. Now you're going to see that what happens next is one of the most educational examples of how a thoughtful writer prepares. So this is Francis, the writer, he's preparing for a film, to create this film out of essentially nothing. The only blueprint he has is a novel, and he's not even satisfied with the novel, so he is going to create this whole world. But it begins with writing. He's going to write this thing first. All right, so he sat down to read the novel very, very carefully. And he said the most important thing you could do on a first reading is write down your impressions while they happen. Here's Francis in his own words. Those are the initial instincts. What you thought was good, what you didn't understand, and what you thought was bad. So he read the book, and he's ready to write notes. He wrote his comments directly on the pages of the novel. He underlined and marked passages, and then he got his reactions down before he could second guess them. And he said it in a way that preparation is really just procrastination if you think about it. And I've tried this exercise time and time again. You take notes, you make outlines, and you may feel busy, but you're not really capturing what you felt the first time you read the thing. That gut reaction. That's the part worth keeping. So Coppola didn't let that slip away. He caught it on the page right in the moment. We're going to get into the creation of the Notebook. And this is how it goes. He made what he called a prompt book. And a prompt book is traditionally used in theater. Directors and stage managers have used them for centuries. And what it is, it's the master document that tracks every decision, every line, every note about the show. And Francis, what he did was he borrowed this idea and brought it to filmmaking. He used it to make movies. And here's what he did. He took a loose leaf of paper and cut a rectangular hole in the center of each page. Then he pulled apart the pages from the novel, the Godfather novel, and took notes on the pages of the novel that he marked up. And page by page, he pasted each page from the original book onto these loose sheets of paper. I'm going to show you a diagram right now. If you're watching this, as you can see, here is an example of what Francis' notebook looks like, and it's completely marked up. So he punches holes in each sheet of paper and puts grommets so he it doesn't rip off easily, and carries it everywhere. Say you were walking down the street in the streets in San Francisco in that time period, and you were to walk by Francis, you would probably see him carrying a big satchel with this gigantic notebook inside. The notebook had every opinion he had about the book, every instinct, every decision about what the movie was going to be. So we're going to talk about the 5 criteria that he has. The first was the paragraph or 2 that summarized what happened in the story up to that point. The second was the time period. When does this scene take place, and does the writing feel like it? The Godfather is set in the 1940s after World War II. Francis wrote notes for each and every scene about that exact era and what it meant. How people dressed, how they talked, the kind of stuff that they cared about. He wanted that world to feel real. This turned out to matter big time. Paramount told him that they wanted him to shoot the film in the style of the 1970s to save money, but Francis pushed back, and he pushed back hard. He made the argument to keep it in the 1940s. He didn't even remember why, but as he went back through his entire book and his notes, he learned why the time period mattered in every scene. The argument was already in the notebook. So it just shows us the importance of taking notes. Our minds play tricks on us. We don't remember things. We tend to forget. So if we go back to our notes, you might find out that your reason why is right there. You wrote it already, and now you know why. You've got that. You got that reminder of why. He won that fight and set it in the 1940s. And back to the criteria. His third criterion is imagery and tone. Images that stood out from the reading, the feel of the scene, what it should look like. The fourth was the core. He borrowed it from director Elia Kazan, who had broken down the film A Streetcar Named Desire and used a similar framework. The core is the purpose of the scene. It means questioning, what is this scene actually doing? What does it have to accomplish? The fifth was the pitfalls. And this is one of my favorite, I find the most interesting. He wrote down every way the scene could go wrong. So bad cliches, flat dialogue, wrong casting, specific dangers for specific scenes. All right, so here's the notebook in use. He would carry this giant notebook around in a bag. Francis had this routine where he would go to Cafe Triste in North Beach, San Francisco. He would sit at a corner table and type on this really cool looking, and I'll show a picture here, a yellow Olivetti typewriter with the notebook. He would sit there and work through each section, writing in the margins, applying his criteria, thinking through the scenes. Over time, his notebook became his visual roadmap. He used different colored pens. He used a ruler to draw lines. He drew squiggly underlines when a moment especially stood out to him. And the amount of ink on the page became its own signal. So for example, if he went back later and saw a page covered in colors and marks, he knew that it was one of the most important scenes. He didn't need to reread the notes every single time. He just saw it. He spotted it right then and there. This is super important. So I'm going to show you an example here. And again, if you're watching this, you can see this, but this is a 2-page spread from the notebook, pages 152 and 153 of the novel. And it covers the restaurant scene. If you've seen the movie already, you know that this is the restaurant scene. If not, no problem. This is just an exercise on how Francis built the scene before shooting. So just to give you context, it's about the shooting of Sollozzo on the left page with the shooting of McCluskey and Michael's exit on the right. Here's what each annotation means. So he wrote, important. The audience knows that he is not following Clemenza's instructions. So Clemenza told Michael, shoot them, then drop the gun immediately and walk out. Coppola flags this as the key dramatic engine of the scene. Okay? The audience remembers those instructions, so when Michael hesitates and keeps the gun in his hand, the audience panics. All right, here it's time stops short, time is frozen, take lots of time. He writes this multiple times across both pages. He wants this moment of killing to feel suspended. And then right here he wrote design and then Hitchcock. And these appear large because he's reminding himself this scene needs to be architected shot by shot the way Hitchcock would do it. Deliberately constructed to control exactly what the audience feels. Genius. I love this. And we've got really and close in red ink. So this is maximum importance. He wants the camera physically close to Sollozzo's head when the gun fires. McCluskey is eating when Michael shoots him. His fork suspended in midair. It's the moment of the shot. This detail is what Coppola specifically wanted to capture. And here it says he chokes. McCluskey is shot in the throat. An extended time after the shots. Don't cut away fast. Stay in the moment. Let it register. All right, the gun in his hand. He starts to leave without dropping it. The audience is dying. Drop it, drop it, drop it. This is the payoff that Clemenza set up. Michael walks towards the door and still holding the gun. All right, so what you're looking at is essentially a director storyboarding in pure language. Every note is either a visual instruction, an emotional cue, or a reminder what the audience is feeling at that exact moment. All right, so Francis says a script is really unnecessary. It's an unnecessary document. And here's the thing that should stop everyone who thinks that a script is the main point. Francis had done all of his preparation before he wrote the screenplay. He wrote the script from the notebook. And then he said something that really stands out. I didn't even need a script because I could have made the movie just from the notebook. He carried it around in that same bag that I described earlier. He worked from that more than the screenplay because the notebook had the actual novel in it, not the screenplay adaptation. Plus all of his own layered thinking, his first instincts, his shot-by-shot notes, his pitfall warnings, everything that the screenplay left out. The notebook had everything. All right, the final document is not always the most important one. Sometimes the most important document is the one you made before the final document. The one full of questions and instincts and fears and ideas that never made it to the polished version, but shaped it all. Coppola has a strange reading habit. He deliberately chooses books that have nothing to do with a project. So if he's working on a project, he looks outside of that. And some people might say strange. I don't consider it strange. I think that there's a lot to learn from other industries, for example, right? I'm not a filmmaker, but I admire all these things that Francis has done and continues to do. Building a notebook, right? It's a slow, tedious process. It There's no AI in that. He found it so important to create this notebook so he could build something meaningful. And to this day, you could purchase the Godfather notebook, right? The printed version, and it's still such a fascinating book to flip through and see. You could just see the process. There's nothing that compares to just doing the hard, long, grueling, tedious work, because at the end of the road, you've got that masterpiece that you created because you took so much time and because you dedicated so much effort to that thing. So Coppola doesn't read to collect information. He reads to find things he could steal, things that he could borrow from other places. He quotes Picasso, and I'm sure we have all heard this, but he says, poor artists borrow, great artists steal. So the lesson here is not just about reading, but about how you treat the things you consume. If something grabs you, a sentence or an image or the way ideas are organized, don't just appreciate it. Ask yourself, how can I make this useful for me, for what I'm doing? How can I do something with this? I'm learning something incredible. How can I put this to work? All right, I want to go back to the image of Coppola at Cafe Triste. He's in North Beach. He's at a corner table. He has his Olivetti typewriter and his gigantic notebook. He goes through the book section by section. He applies his criteria and writes in the margins. There's something about the physical setup, the overall setup, that matters here. It was a ritual, right? And I'm a huge fan of this book called Daily Rituals, where you read a page or two about creative people who, how they would do their work. There's repetition, and some might say that this repetition is boring, but it's that daily repetition that is helping him build his masterpiece. So he goes to a specific place, he uses the same tools, he uses the same method. It reduces friction. When you sit down at the chair, at the table with the same tools, there's nothing more to decide. You just start and you focus on your project. He also designed this physical artifact, this notebook, that made the work easier to do. The wide margins gave him space to write. The grommets kept it from falling apart. The bag made it portable. This makes the entire document mobile. You could bring it out anywhere. It doesn't matter how big it is. I mean, in some cases. In this case, it doesn't matter how big it is. It's a giant book that probably weighs a couple of pounds, but you lug it everywhere, you get used to it, and you have it there with you. And you could always reference the book, the notebook. What is the format that lets you do your best thinking? Is it a laptop? Is it a journal? Is it a notepad? Is it index cards? So in my case, I like loose sheets of paper. I type my notes and I print them out. When it comes to reflecting, I love to journal, writing with a pen, and my journal index cards are ideal for, in my case, I love to use index cards for simple notes or reminders. I use them for to-do lists. What is it that you use? I'm curious to know. Leave it in the comments. One thing that Coppola said that surprised me is he called collaboration the sex of creativity. It's not just useful, not just necessary, it's the most exciting part. He said that working with a dozen talented people, all coming together to make something that none of you could make alone, that's what theater and film are. And as a director, you're not just leading, you're following. You're following what the actors are doing, what the composer is doing, what the visual artists are doing. And then you evaluate together. He described a specific moment in the Apocalypse Now. They were shooting on the river. The actors were stoned. Someone set off smoke grenades. The colored ones used for landing zones, but they were in the water, where smoke grenades served no real purpose, but the soldiers were just setting them off because they were high and it was beautiful. Francis saw this in the Dallies, And the whole crew said together, let's do more of that. That movie, it does stand out with the colored smoke for sure. Didn't know they were all stoned. That one decision pushed Apocalypse Now further into surrealism than he had planned. The movie had become too strange for a normal ending. He said that Marlon Brando figured it out before he did. Brando said, "You painted yourself into a corner, haven't you?" But in this case, you could say that the film told him how to make it. He and his collaborators followed what was working, they amplified it, and let it lead them somewhere that no one anticipated. I want to come back to the pitfall criterion because I think it's the most underused idea in the whole story. Coppola sat down with the most anticipated film adaptation for a best-selling novel, right? And he wrote a list of all the ways it could be embarrassing. The value in this is when you're excited about a project, you naturally focus on what's possible, the potential. That excitement can blind you, and it could lead you to obvious pitfalls. Writing the pitfalls in a list, that forces you to look at the project the way a critical audience would. Not to kill your excitement, but to prepare you for moments when the excitement has to survive with reality. All right, so that is the portion about writing. I'm going to get into takeaways. So let's pull what I think is actually useful here in terms of how this applies outside of filmmaking. So if you're not a filmmaker, I'm not a filmmaker, we're going to see how this applies to our work. So number one, write down your first impressions. The moment you encounter new material, a book, a song, a project, a data set, a problem, write down what you actually think. That contains information that gets harder to access the more time passes. I can tell you, I have a background in music, all right, and I've written a handful of songs. There have been so many moments when I could be driving, in the shower, asleep, walking, running, doing a project, and I don't have an instrument or something in my hands. Now it's a little bit easier. You could grab your phone, you could record. Great. However, it's so important to have at least something to write with, right? So like a notepad and a pen that you could quickly jot something down. Those ideas, they're fleeting. Do your best to keep those ideas by simply writing them down or recording them on your phone. All right, build a master document, a place where your raw thinking lives. Francis had a novel and he wrote his notes on the same pages, and he had the same pages individually glued to this gigantic notebook. So have a primary source. If it's, I, for example, use Google Drive. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I just use the product. That's a useful tool to me. I use journals. I use notebooks. Those are useful tools to me. Pencils, pens, always useful. Apply criteria to your material. Coppola's 5 criteria are synopsis, time period, imagery and tone, core purpose, and pitfalls. You can develop your own version of this for whatever you work on. Just have a set of core skills or core values or core set of things that you're after. Read outside of your project, outside of your industry. So if you're, for example, a filmmaker, it'd be cool to read an autobiography by a chef or a race car driver or a runner. No matter what industry you're pulling from, there's always something to learn and it's always something to apply into your own work. All right, so Francis Ford Coppola, in his mid-80s, he describes himself as a solipsist movie director whose life is the movie he's making. And what he meant was that the films he made seemed to track him and his life in real time. When he was young and made The Godfather, critics said that he was like Michael Corleone, quietly, strategically taking over. When he made Apocalypse Now, they said that he was Kurtz. When he made Gardens of Stones, a film about a soldier who loses his son, he lost his son during production. He said that for 30 years, losing that son was the first thing that he thought of every morning. He was reading Marcus Aurelius around that time, And one quote really helped him. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if you lose someone you love, the way to keep them is to try to be more like them. Then they live in your actions. That's a man who spent his whole life reading and thinking and finding that ideas actually hold up when you test them. He put it all down on paper first, he trusted his thinking, and then he made the movie. And that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you for watching. If you've come this far, please like and subscribe so more people could find this show. And if you are interested in checking out the last episode about Neil Young, check it out right up here. We'll see you there. Thanks.